Hello gang, firstly, sorry for missing a couple of weeks on this true crime thing. I've been so busy with work, a few announcements coming that we'll be able to talk about shortly, life as well, everything got a bit and if you're not a regular viewer, then you have no idea what I'm talking about and it doesn't matter, but if you are, then please, I'm sorry, we are back to regularly scheduled programming and ready to dive into another case that I've picked for you. If you live in England, the name Rhys Jones will probably ring at least a few bells in your head. He's one of those names, and this is one of those cases that is famous here in the UK. It's been 14 years since the 11-year-old was shot and killed in Liverpool while walking home from football practice. And his is the story that I'm telling you today on this mini true crime series. Shwa-na-na-na, 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 shwa-na-na-na. Rhys was an 11-year-old boy born in Liverpool in September in 1995. He lived with his mum and dad, Melanie and Stephen, and his older brother, Owen. Now, they lived in Croxteth Park Estate. It was a big community. Everyone knew each other. There was a pub in the middle and there were shops around, and it's really small, but all the families know each other. And everyone who knew Rhys described him as friendly, outgoing. He was just a great kid. He was really sociable, he was super cheeky, he was always up to something, always playing pranks, and he was obsessed with football. He would play it, he would watch it. He wanted the new kit every season. He supported Everton Football Club. He was always out playing with his friends, and also for the Fir Tree Football Club, which was the local one in his area. It was on August the 22nd that the club decided they were going to hold an extra training session in preparation for an upcoming game that weekend. It was kind of like the perfect day for Rhys, really, because not only was he going to get to play football with his team, there was also an England versus Germany match scheduled for later that day. So he was going to play and then he was going to watch, and it was going to be a football bonanza, and that was his kind of thing. He walked to his training session, which was about a 5-minute walk away. Now, he got there around 6 p.m. and he realised he'd forgotten his money and he panicked. Now, I get this as well, because when you're a kid and you have to bring money for something and you don't have it, like you forget to bring it, the panic, I just remember when I was younger, the panic that would just wash into every pore of my body. Now, if you're an adult, you'd probably ask if you can bring it next week or bring it on the match on Saturday, but Rhys didn't think of that. He ran off home to grab the £5. His mum gave him the money, and then she drove him, because obviously he was going to be late now, back to the practice. And I read somewhere that it was a great session. All the boys enjoyed themselves. They had a cheeky penalty shootout and Rhys was the goalkeeper, and it was like a really good session. After training, the coach offered Rhys a drive home. He only lived, it was like a 5-minute walk, I think, and a 1 or 2 minute drive from the football club, but he refused. And it was around 7 p.m. It's August, so it's super light. There were people around. It was a warm summer's evening, and as he was walking through the car park of the Fir Tree pub, he fell over. And this was actually seen by the football coach, Steve, the same guy who offered him a lift. And thinking that he had slipped and maybe hurt himself, people rushed over to see if Rhys was okay. A woman who had been sitting outside of the pub, she got there first, and Rhys was already lying in a pool of his own blood. She tried to administer first aid. Somebody called for help because Rhys had been shot. I can't even imagine the scene, like the panic and chaos that would have unfolded in those moments. His family were brought to the car park, the paramedics were trying to work on him, they took him to hospital and they carried on trying to save his life, but there was nothing that they could do. They tried everything, but at 8:46 p.m. on the 22nd of August 2007, Rhys Jones was pronounced dead, and in shock his family left the hospital without their son. Now, within hours of the murder, the news spread like wildfire. It was absolutely everywhere. His picture, the story, was front page news nationally, and the Merseyside police got to work to try and solve this crime. I mean, who would shoot an 11-year-old boy in broad daylight? This was a Category 8 case. That means that it took priority over any case that the Merseyside police were investigating at that time. It took the resources, it took the money, it took the officers, it took the time, it took the feet on the ground. They went searching for any and everything, but no one had seen someone pull the trigger. No one had seen Rhys actually actually being shot. And the police were quite literally on the hunt for bullet casings, the bullet that had hit Rhys. They were on the hunt for the murder weapon. They were on the hunt for absolutely everything. The crime scene yielded pretty much nothing. And there wasn't a word nor a whisper. And they did establish quite quickly though that it was potentially probably a gang-related crime. Witnesses reported seeing a bunch of teenage boys in the car park, and that's kind of all they had to go on. They had been aware for a few years about gang activity in Liverpool. Now over the years there have been conflicts between two groups whose territory was separated by just one road. The gangs weren't super close to where Rhys lived, but the Croxteth Park gang, which was from the old Croxteth estate, was about 1 mile away. So the activity didn't really spill into Rhys's area, and Rhys was 11, so he definitely wasn't connected with any of these gangs, but there was gang activity in the general vicinity. The police did struggle though, because gang members, they've always got each other's backs and no one was speaking. The police thought that maybe potential witnesses might be scared, that people didn't want to come forward, and also that code of silence that runs through these gangs, or even of teenage boys. They have a no snitching mentality, even if it comes to the crime that's committed against a child. Rhys's family did appeals. Everton Football Club did appeals. The family went to the stadium just 3 days after his death, and the crowd did a 1-minute applause, a cheer for Rhys. They were trying to get as much energy and attention on this story as possible, and trust me, it carried, because the name Rhys Jones, I know it, you probably know it, his picture is one that immediately you can identify him. Rumours began circulating around the community, with one name popping up more than others. Hundreds of tips came into the police within the first 24 hours of them investigating this crime, and witnesses who were at the pub that day who were questioned kept giving the same name over and over again. The story began to unfold that someone shot across the parking lot at 2 boys on bikes. As they ran, the person shot again, and that was the bullet that hit Rhys. The shooter fired a third and final time at the intended targets, but missed again. And some CCTV did pick up the shooter on different cameras cycling away, wearing all black with a hood up on a very distinctive bike. It caught the route that the shooter took. He rode for quite a bit. He almost got hit by a car on that road I mentioned that separate the two gang areas, and ended up at the old Croxteth estate. Now this is where the Croxteth gang is located, not in the Croxteth estate that Rhys lived in. They're two separate areas, Croxteth estate and old Croxteth estate, and that's the one that has social housing, that's the one that's a council estate, and that's the one where the gang activity was rife. The CCTV did help narrow down which gang the shooter might be part of, the Croxteth crew, or the Crocky crew as they called themselves, but it didn't give them an identity. It didn't give them a specific house or location as to where the boy might have lived, but that name was repeated and repeated over and over and over again to police, and the rumours began to swell. The boy that everyone was naming was called Sean Mercer. He was 16 and he was well known to the police. Even at this age, he had been stopped and searched over 80 times in his life. He had an ASBO, which is an antisocial behavioural order they used to give out for a very short time back in the day, and it was just a thing. It wasn't like a criminal conviction, but like a restraining ordery type thing that would stop someone from going to certain areas or leaving their house at certain times or doing certain things to try and keep the community safe. And Sean was born into a gang, the Crocky crew, the Croxteth crew. That was one of 2 main gangs in the area. The other one was the Strand gang, which is from an area called Norris Green. And these 2 gangs were rivals. Now, Rhys's death wasn't the first murder as a result of this feud. Almost a year to the day before, a boy called Liam Smith, who was in the Strand gang, had been murdered also in a shooting. He was on a visit in prison. He got into an argument in the visiting room with one gang member, and then they were waiting for him outside and they shot him dead. And the police picked up Sean Mercer and 2 other boys actually, Dean Kelly and James Yates, and arrested them and brought them in for questioning. But of course they weren't cooperative at all, but you wouldn't expect them to be. With no physical evidence apart from loads of witnesses coming forward, the rumour mill swelling, and his affiliation with the gangs, the police believed that Sean was the gunman and that Dean and James were his accomplices. They put Sean in a lineup, but 5 witnesses failed to pick him out. The boys gave written statements, and in Sean's one, he said he was at Dean's house. In Dean's one, he said he was at Sean's house, and there you go, the boys were let go. But the rumours continued, and posts on social media didn't stop. I haven't been able to get my hands on the actual Facebook post statuses, if it was Facebook. I can't find the screenshots. But this is what the police pieced together using the rumours and the tips and this social media activity. On the night that Rhys was killed, the 22nd of August, members of the Strand gang were kicking it in the Fir Tree car park, which was on the rival territory. Wayne Brady, who was a Strand gang member, was dating a girl from the Croxteth area. So this is like a bit of a gangster Romeo and Juliet. Her name was Vicky. She eventually actually had to end up moving out of her area because the Croxteth crew, they shot up her house. Her and her family were receiving threats daily, but they were hanging out in this pub car park on the Croxteth crew turf on this evening. The Croxteth gang arrived, of course they did. By the time they got there, most of the Strand gang had left and only 2 boys remained, and they were the ones who were the actual targets for the shooter. The police got Sean Mercer's phone records. They found 2 incoming calls around the time of Rhys's death, but nothing really came of that. They then decided to bug some of the homes of Sean Mercer's closest friends and monitor what they said. Now, the audio isn't great on most of these clips. I've got some of them from a YouTube video that I found, but it was pretty incriminating. One of the boys' parents burnt his SIM card so that he couldn't be tracked. They also found that Sean Mercer had turned up at a friend's house just a few minutes after Rhys's murder, and the boy was only 15, so he wasn't named in this case, but the rest of the gang were there too. It caught some of the gang going through their story, and the police received an anonymous tip pointing them to the location of the murder weapon. The boys whose house it was at became a huge part in this case, and he was actually the first person in the UK to receive immunity in a criminal trial, because his testimony, even though it incriminated him, it really got the rest of the Crocky crew banged to rights. He's just called Boy X. He explained that Sean made him go pick up a package and keep it. And that package ended up containing 2 guns, one of which was the murder weapon used to kill Rhys. The same boy also pointed police to the bike that the shooter was riding away on. It was actually a super rare model, only 3 of which had been sold in the UK, and 1, of course, was sold to Sean. And his mum had lied and said that he didn't own that bike. He had lied and said that he didn't own that bike. But a passerby had picked it up on the road thinking nobody wanted it, seen it on the news, handed it into police, and Sean's DNA was found on the bike. It was 8 months after the murder of Rhys that 14 people were arrested. This included Sean Mercer, his mum, a lot of the people whose houses had been bugged, including their parents, and the parents who tried to burn that boy's SIM card. And a lot of people were convicted in this case. Some for perverting the course of justice, some for assisting an offender, and Sean Mercer, who was convicted of the murder of Rhys Jones. And he is the only person still in prison for this crime. Rhys Jones is a name that has never left my mind, and to think that it's been 14 years since he was so senselessly killed is heartbreaking. Thank you so much for watching and for rocking with me on this anniversary series. I'm so sorry that I've left you for a fortnight without any content and without any updates. I've just been working so hard on some related things, but also just like life, and I needed to take a break from YouTube. So yes, please subscribe if you've got this far into my video, like, drop a comment, let me know what case you think I should cover next, and I will be back next week on Monday. I promise I'll be back on Monday. I'm going to record the video before Monday to make sure that I'm back on Monday with another episode of the anniversary, and I hope that you have a really good week.